90 minutes past the hour of 6 o'clock in Trinidad and Tobago, and it's time for us to shine a spotlight on the Ministry of National Security's National Budget Review 2024 to 2025.
And Bonnie Whaler talks about it's the strangest man that he's ever seen, marked with the sign of the Nazarene. We are speaking with the Minister of National Security, Fitzgerald Hinds. Thank you so much for making the time, sir. And yes, we will be getting into budget allocations, but even before we do that, I want to premise the conversation, please. Balance. There are some individuals who would want to talk about feeling a little more safe and willing to have an environment that's a little more authoritarian versus some people who want everything is a right and everything is a privilege and nothing must be curtailed. How do you negotiate those two ends of the spectrum while still dealing with the business of national security?
Thank you very, very much. And yours is a very, very important and interesting introduction to this. In terms of rights, I find myself, after all of these years of exposure to the business of national security, starting with my time as a police officer, practicing criminal law, in charge of the prisons, member of parliament, minister of national security, I find myself having concluded that all that we have done so far, with the best intentions, observing the international tenets of human rights and the respect for our constitution and the law and all of that, we as a society, at the end of the day, today it appears to some that we have painted ourselves into a neat, tight corner where those who offend against the society and traumatize us with crime and criminality appear to have the advantage. All that we have done, the bottom line is that. That is perhaps because the world, human person, to quote Ellis Clark, it doesn't seem to be getting, generally speaking, altogether better. And we have become, as a world, and certainly as a society, a lot more accepting of, tolerating, forbearing, antisocial behavior, some of which is out and out criminality. And I can evidence this by saying, you know, years ago, a young man, you did something wrong and you became a jailbird, you can't get yourself a partner, female partner in that community. You were kind of, you know, I mean, of course we observe and respect the tenets of rehabilitation and all of that. The bottom line is, look at El Salvador. The president went into office, Boselli, and he told the troops, police and soldiers, once a man is associated or known to be associated, just have to have tattoos associated with gang, lock up for life. That's what's happening in El Salvador. He has a 91% popularity. Crime has gone. El Salvador has moved from the most crime-ridden society, one of the worst in the world, to now one of the safest. They say El Salvador is safer than places in the United States and Europe. In Duterte in the Philippines, when he was in office, he instructed the people to purge their communities of criminals. In other words, these two men, by virtue of their arrangements, their personalities even, their thinking, declared war on criminals in those ways and got certain results, but it had implications for human rights and all of those kinds of conversations. We cannot do that in Trinidad and Tobago. In Trinidad and Tobago, as you have correctly identified, a person's rights are very, very severely guarded, even by the courts. We had a case here, and I don't want to dwell too much on it because it is before the court, where a man was pursued by the police. He slipped out of Trinidad and Tobago. He found himself in Guyana, Barbados, and was on his way to Miami to go someplace else. And a court described the police action. Now, I'm not saying that the police, without a CARICOM arrest warrant and without extradition proceedings, were right constitutionally. That may not have been the case, as Barbados established, and those matters are before the court in Trinidad and Tobago. But the general perception coming out of that is that this man was wronged. You understand?
But
You have children in communities with cell phones provided by adults whose job it is to say the police coming in the neighborhood.
And that brings me to the question, because sometimes when we talk about crime, we talk about a specific or distinct law being broken. But in terms of the system and the structure that helps to facilitate that, what are some of those parts in the ecosystem that you think need a little more attention?
The criminal justice system, for certain. Take for a quick example again, the police may know from even an IC witness that X was on the scene of a crime, but that is not enough to have him convicted and jailed and pay for his crime. The courts, the DPP require much more than that. So even though the police might know that, there are some evidential levels that they must reach in order to demonstrate that to the court. So this is why I made the point all together on all ends. And we approach crime and violence as a public health concern, meaning it affects and it involves actions on all of our parts as individuals. We must not be tolerant to antisocial behavior and crime. To some extent, we have become so. If the police try to arrest somebody in town now, you see people gather around, not supporting even moral support for the police, but all you too wicked, leave him alone. All you do is thief a little thing. It have people killing out there. That kind of thing is what I mean when I say the society has become altogether more tolerant of those behaviors. And as you would know from your military observation of history, no guerrilla force, no insurgent group can operate in a community without the acquiescence, the support, or at the very least turning a blind eye, playing ignorant on the part of those who are present doing it. It is on those bases that I make the point. It is a tough business, but this is where we are, and we, as I say, have seen it as a public health issue, and therefore we are involving all. We have, starting from presenting a budget with $6.1 billion to national security. It would be expended on the programs for the police, for the defense force, for border security, all of the things, all the way through to rehabilitation programs inside of the prison system, with the view or the hope that those who offend will have an opportunity to be restored, to touch their consciences, so that they would know that they have done the society wrong and harm. They would be rehabilitated so as to avoid the revolving door which we had seen years ago in the late, just approaching 2010 or so. The statistics showed we had a 60% recidivism rate, and now it is, I think, closer to 50% or thereabout. I can't know the exact figure off my head now, but it is certainly less than it was at that time. So the rehabilitative system seemed to be working.
But you quoted figures and you gave that $6.1 billion, which is the third highest after education and training and health.
Yes.
How do you treat and put things into place to combat crime and the system, that ecosystem, past a fiscal cycle? And some people might even say past an election cycle, because we see a case now coming to be, there's a ruling that would have been 7 years in the making, and we heard about it yesterday.
Yes, and that's not the first. There are many like it. A man is now 71 years of age. In 1999, 20 plus years ago, he committed a home invasion, serious robbery, assaulted people in the house and all of that. And recently, the court had to deal with the matter, talking about within the last 2 weeks or so. So the criminal justice system, as part of the ecosystem, as you so appositely put it, is an important part of this. So we as a government spend a lot of time and resources to try to quicken and to improve the criminal justice system as part of the ecosystem of which you spoke. And talking about ecosystem, of that $6.1 billion, believe it or not, 64 to 65% of that is spent on salaries and emoluments for the personnel working in the Ministry of National Security, and that is applicable to all the ministries, roughly 64 to 65%. So therefore, in the ecosystem, and with a wage bill of $11 billion a year, the state for the state sector, public sector workers, the broader public sector. Productivity is an important element. If you, for $11 billion a year, and 65% of a ministry's budget go into salaries and emoluments, and to some extent recurrent expenditure, rents and light bills and all of these things, and not directly on dealing with the problems that we spoke about, then productivity is an important issue in the ecosystem.
And I like the fact that you talk about productivity, and is one of our watchwords in terms of production. And looking at that ecosystem, some people might speak to that toleration of crime that you intimated. Some people may say the system is part of the problem, in the sense that if it drags a little bit, then, or is in the courts a little bit, then lawyers have a part to play. People can be transporting criminals a little longer. So even when looking at that crime as a business, both on the legal as well as illegal side, is that something that you say that, well, you started speaking about working towards an efficiency or a higher efficiency in workflow. How else can we do that a little differently?
Well, this is the point. You know, when people say that it is the system is we. The system are the operators of the system and in the system. If you get optimal productivity from all the workforce of Trinidad and Tobago, a number of beautiful things will happen. For one thing, the economy, the economists tell me, would grow by about 25% in a flash. I also would observe, if we were optimally productive, all the grass would be cut, the drains will be cut, things would happen. The quality of life for you and I as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago would be so much better. So that this productivity question is a very important one, and to the extent that it is a national issue, to the point where the founding father, Dr. Williams, and others caused it to become part of the national watchwords, then it means, therefore, that the entire system will improve, and therefore that would include the law enforcement or the Ministry of National Security's aspect or contribution to it. So you have all of these elements. Corruption is another major impediment to national development and solving crime. Corruption. Because in a state of corruption, you will get minimal investment that affects economic growth and economic development. And also it leads to unfairness, where some get access and some not. Those who have deeper pockets will get more than their fair share. And especially when you have elements who are sworn and paid to protect the society from criminals, if they become corrupt or are corrupt, then you can imagine the conundrum you're dealing with. And while it is easy to think that it is only ministerial corruption is an issue in a country, and certainly in Trinidad and Tobago, and by the way, on that score, today this government boasts that after near 10 years, there has been no sustained or sustainable suggestion of ministerial corruption. But that does not mean, as Dr. Rowley said in 2015 when he became Prime Minister, it does not mean that when the government changes from whatever it was to the PNM, that corruption stops. Because if a society has corruption all the way through, that is a national scourge. So this is the point I'm making. So you can have an employee in national security, or for an example in the judiciary, who learns from their function on the desk of an application for warrants by the police to search your or my house and could tip off someone. You can have a national radar system costing millions of dollars, and a man at the console, let me call it that, on the table, supposed to see what's coming in Toko and wherever. He turns a blind eye. It renders the entire system and financial and capital investment otious, valueless.
I like the fact that you're really a man of letters, and that level, that word sustained. But this conversation that you're on right now brings to the question level of personal responsibility, even outside of systems and organizations, just individuals of Trinidad and Tobago, responsibilities as individuals to help address crime.
That's why we see it philosophically, we got the governments of CARICOM together in 2023 in the month of April. We got them together to discuss violence as a public health issue involving all, affecting all, individual responsibility, like public health issue of COVID. You had to decide to wash your hands, not to shake mine, not to sneeze, to wear a mask, to buy your personal sanitizer, to make sacrifices. Governments did it. Trade, international trade was shut down. Movement of people. So much was sacrificed, the economies of the world, in order to save us from it. And in the COVID-19 public health concern experience, the focus was on protecting the large majority of us who were not yet victims to the virus. And so we are taking that approach. It is why we spend more money on education and on health, including mental health, in dealing with the criminal problem and criminality in Trinidad and Tobago. It is why we have a whole regime for dealing with youth, a Ministry of Youth Development, creating opportunities for young people so as not to be influenced by gang activity. And all of that, the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, the Ministry of Social Development, the Ministry of Health, not just the Ministry of National Security, in this whole of government approach, because we do understand even the music coming from outside, the videos published outside, the hate, the satanic posturing, and all of the things that influence the human mind, starting from outside of Trinidad and Tobago, the gun manufacturing that did not happen in Trinidad and Tobago, the cocaine manufacturing that did not happen in Trinidad and Tobago, all the examples of the gangsterism and gangster music and all of that that influences the young man and woman in Trinidad and Tobago are matters of concern to us. And therefore, in this public health approach, we say it's the individual, it's the family. That's why we focus on parenting. It's the community. It's a whole of government, whole of region. We involve CARICOM. A whole of world. We have international partners with whom we collaborate. We buy technologies from them. This 6.1 billion really is directed to achieving all of that in dealing with the crime problem that we experience in Port of Spain and Trinidad and Tobago more generally, including, of course, as I said, Tobago.
I mean, just have a little under 2 minutes, Minister. We started with a question of balance. I want to end with a question of balance, please. How do you balance doing the work and keeping certain things out of the public eye while having the appearance of doing the work, as opposed to saying, well, what are you doing?
Well, you may observe that I am not the most noisy Minister of National Security that you may have had, because it is exactly for that. I have said a long time ago that 85% of what happens here we can't speak about. That's one. And secondly, I have come to understand that so much has been said, but so little has been done. I think this country requires more work, more doing than talking and yapping and complaining and quarreling. I try to focus on the work. Understand what the issues are, understand what the problems are, be guided by the professionals. In the run-up to the budget, I consulted with professionals about their views, and we always do. And you are guided by intellect as you do the business, and it's not so much about talking, it's about work. Trinidad and Tobago needs a lot more work in national security and across the economy, public and private, if we are to get anything closer to what we would all like for Trinidad and Tobago and for each other.
I think we can all agree that we want a place that is safer, in the main, for us and our families. And we want to thank you for your time as you go about that business and go about that work, Minister of National Security Fitzgerald Hinds. And we are asking you to stay with us. The Now Morning Show, it continues after this.